Let me start by I don't even think I've asked you this in previous conversations. What got you started on this journey to talk about inequity in domestic labor or mental load? What was your journey to doing more of this on in social or just in general? I'd love to hear more about how you got into it.
So I was posting on social media talking about being a working mom, essentially, and kind of how we made it work, the logistics. I talked about the cost of childcare. And one day I just decided to share a personal experience about how I had at one point considered divorce. I was in my brain thinking, like, maybe I should just do this by myself because I already am kind of doing it by myself. And I shared the experience of how I had a active partner and a super hands-on dad, right? Like all the things. And I was still really burnt out and exhausted from all of the work of the home and the mental load. And so I just shared that. And I didn't really anticipate it being anything from there. But obviously, I had no idea how much women would relate to the conversation about the mental load. And so from that point, my husband and I, at that point, when I'd shared that, had already been on a years long journey of figuring out how to share domestic labor and the mental load. And that was sparked because I heard E. Brodsky on a podcast. I was really burnt out and frustrated, and her putting words to it was the light bulb I needed to be like, "Oh, this is what's happening. This is why I'm frustrated. This is why I resent my partner." Like, this is all this stuff. I had no idea how to say it. And so, after a year of doing that work is when I shared my experience. And I said, a year ago, this is how I felt. And this is where we are a year later. By that point, we had come up with systems that worked for our family. We had made massive progress in our home in regards to sharing the work. And I felt a sense of responsibility once women were reaching out to me, asked me how I did it, to help them. The gap I tried to fill was to help them articulate what was happening, not necessarily to solve the problem right away, but that was the thing that I needed, was just the language to describe what was happening. And once I had that, I felt like I could actually use tools to change those dynamics. But until I could articulate it, I had no idea where to even start.
And how have you seen that change since you started talking about it? Do you feel like the discussion is more or less in the same place? Do you think it's evolved a little bit since? Are women more familiar with these terms? Are they more engaged in it?
Yeah, so I think that was 2 years ago when I shared it. I think it's a vastly different conversation today. I think there's so much more awareness around the term mental load. You're hearing it used in the news daily. I have a Google alert, like the mental load is a topic. It's a very big buzzword. I think there's much more awareness of it. However, I think the conversation actually looks really different from it did 2 years ago because we live in a climate that is very different politically, socially. There's a lot of conversation about whose responsibility is the mental load, and is it fair that women are asking men to do this work? Maybe we should go back to when women didn't work. It is a different conversation today when it comes to the mental load, maybe even more complicated than it was a few years ago. But I definitely think there's much more awareness. And I think women in particular feel much more confident in having conversations about it because it's no longer a vague idea. It's something that has terminology and resources around it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very hopeful things I've seen is that when I first read Fair Play and was starting to get, because I was similarly dealing, I had just had my second baby and I was like, this isn't working. I'm trying to go back to work. I'm doing too many things. This feeling amongst myself and others that this was a personal problem. And so there was a fear of saying it out loud because it thought it's like, well, it's working for everybody else. And so therefore it must just be me. I must just not be doing it right. And because they're not saying anything, I don't want to say anything. And I think our mothers and even our generation, but certainly our mothers, I think tried their best to do it so that it stayed invisible, right? They wanted it to seem effortless. Like it was a goal of theirs for the invisible to stay invisible. And therefore, like so many of us were not aware of how much work it was going to be, how stressful it would be, how hard it would be, because you know, our parents didn't really talk about it. And so it does feel like
Yeah.
it's become much more socially acceptable and no longer a personal problem to just say, this isn't working. This is
Yeah.
more work than one person can do. This is damaging my relationship. I don't want to keep doing this. Or I can't. I literally can't keep doing this. I need a better system. I need people to talk to about it. So that feels a little different from 3 years ago. I would agree that the problem is not remotely solved. But to your point, unless we have the language for it and a little bit of a community, we can't solve it anyway. So that feels like progress.
And I do think it's much more normalized that it's not an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. It was essentially designed for this to happen, right? The systems we operate within are just the way we're socialized and conditioned as people growing up. Like it feels inevitable, right? That we end up in this place. But now it doesn't feel like a personal problem. I say that women will message me all the time and say, "Oh my gosh, you make me feel like I'm not alone in this. I thought I was." And I felt the same way. I didn't talk to my friends about it. I didn't talk to my mom. I didn't talk to my sister. I was like, I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. We did something wrong. Like something broke. And I don't know how it broke or why it broke or what's happening. I will also say I think a big reckoning that we didn't address, which is, COVID happened and it really showed the mental load disproportionately falling to women even more than it already had, right? Like when daycares closed and schools closed, moms stepped up. And so I think in particular, for me, I tell people all the time, I don't think I would have gotten to the point I did as quickly had it not been for a pandemic. I think I would have still ended up in a position where I was feeling that burnout and feeling resentful. My husband he's a first responder, so he was gone always. And I took on everything. And it just showed me very quickly the work that women have always carried and have been expected to carry. And I think that also in the last 5 years really has been a big reckoning, which has really changed the way we talk about it. Because I think prior to the pandemic, right, like we wouldn't have even talked about remote work, right, as it relates to the mental load and how these things are also connected. And now we can see them because we've lived it. And I think that was a big part for me too, that I think changed the conversation in a big way.
And one of the things that I was a little bit shocked when it is like once you see it, you can't unsee it, right?
Yeah.
Once you understand these terms and you see these dynamics, then you kind of have no choice but to fix it for most people because I was frustrated, I was overwhelmed, but I wasn't really mad at my partner or at society or at whatever because I was placing it all on myself. But once you start to realize how systemic it is and all of the ways in which it sets you up to fail, all of the costs that it has for women, both in terms of their career and their mental health and their quality of rest and their autonomy and their sense of personality, right? Once you start to see that, I mean, I quit my job and started Persist because I was so angry, I suppose, at having been in the business world, how many amazing tools have always been available to business owners. And now as an entrepreneur, anything I Google, I'm like, I need help with this thing. There's an amazing tool to help me do it. If I want to goal set with my team, if I want to, planning sessions, like anything that helps with communication, shared language in the business world, there's amazing tools. And yet there is just this huge gap when it comes to solving this challenge at home. Yeah, I felt so passionately that there should be more tools available. And to frame it a little bit, and then I want to ask you some specific parts of this process of certainly awareness of the challenge, right, is such an important point. And from there, where we sort of like to frame it is a majority of families, and specifically a lot of women will say, I know I do less. So what is the path to less? There's really three ways to do it, right? You stop doing it or you give it to somebody else. And the set of things that we offer in the app and that we're talking about the blog series are really, how do you do that? Your mom always made home cooked meals and you have a belief that being a good mom is about, providing home cooked meals. And you have all of this societal pressure of like, moms do cook or whatever it might be. So you have a bunch of baggage tied to what does a good meal look like and who should be doing it. And you've sort of, through your belief system and how you were raised and your values, you've assigned that standard and that task to yourself, right? And so how do you go about unwinding that, right? Into something that maybe works for that season in your life? Like what have you seen really help particularly women as they're sort of struggling with standards and sort of ownership tied to beliefs about what it means to be a good mom?
It's hard. I think so much of what we take on as women and mothers is based on what we believe in how we provide value or what we were told, right? Or what we saw too growing up. It's not always what you were explicitly told. It's what you saw, right? And what you absorbed as you were growing up and coming into motherhood or marriage. And, I think we all have different versions of this, and men have it too, right? I think I tell people all the time, one of the best questions I think you can ask on a first date is tell me about your parents. Because I just think it'll tell you so much about how they were raised. They might be like, my mom was a stay-at-home mom and my dad worked full time, and my mom, she showed us her love through cooking. And it's like, did she show you her love through cooking, or did she have to cook? Right? Like, which was it? And I'm not saying she didn't show her love through cooking, but right, there's these narratives we have around these ideas. And I get messages every single day from women in their 60s who are like, I hate cooking, but I made home cooked meals every single day because it was expected of me.
Yeah.
So I do think we're told so often, right? What is a reflection of us that shows we are a good mom or a good wife or a good person? And that is how we show up in the world, right? My kitchen is a reflection of me. The way my kid's hair is brushed is a reflection of me. These are things I will be judged by. And so I think that feeds into it a little bit. One of the ways I think we can kind of get away from that is having these conversations out loud, right? I have a lot of conversations on my platform with women, and I'll say out loud, I don't feel guilty if I miss a bedtime. I don't. My husband's able to do bedtime, and he misses every single morning with the kids for work, and nobody makes him feel guilty about that. So I'm not going to feel guilty about missing bedtime once in a while. Or, we do a meal kit 3 nights a week because I just can't think of another dinner. And that's just not something that I find valuable to spend my time on. And my kids still eat a great meal and they're happy and it's fine. So I think it's important to have these conversations out loud, whether it's with our friend or our colleagues or whomever it is, because one, I think it shows us that we can be a good mother, a good wife, good person without having to be a martyr to all these things and not take them all on. But also, when you start to have these conversations, you learn new ways to do things. I was just on a walk with some girlfriends and we were talking about laundry. And like one of them was like, how do you stay ahead of it with kids? There's just so much of it. And we all do it differently. And you can learn from each other and have conversations about these things. And I think that is something where, to your point, historically, maybe it wasn't talked about that much. People weren't saying, like, tell me how you make this work with your kids and how do you make dinner without hating it. People are having those conversations now and want to share information. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, the laundry one, I saw some influencer that like changed my brain chemistry when they were talking about laundry's never done. They're like, because it's either in
Never
the
done.
basket or it's on your body. So if you stop thinking of laundry being a done thing, and oh my gosh, it changed such a relief of being like, oh, the goal isn't having laundry done because it is not ever really done, but the goal is to, make sure I never have more than 2 loads of laundry at a time or whatever it might be, right? Even just that resetting of like, success means all your laundry is done is an insane thing to set as an everyday goal when you have, especially when you have kids wearing multiple outfits a day, right? It's
Sports and all the things. It's unrealistic. I think a lot of these tasks are never done. It's like the dishes, right? You wash them and then you make another meal. Like there's immediately more dishes.
instantly.
You're never done.
Well, the other thing you brought up that I think is a really great thing to talk about too is guilt. And I think it was Dr. Becky saying, we misuse that word a lot. And like guilt is when your actions don't align with your values. And which is why it's so important that, you try to be as explicit as possible with your core values. And one of the challenges I've seen is that we always expect women to be able to hold even opposing values, right? Like you're sexy, but you're maternal.
Yeah.
You are free and easygoing, but things are always taken care of. And like anyone with that really looks at it says, well, those things are opposed. You can't necessarily have one with the other. And we somehow
Right.
want women to do that, which is why we feel guilty. But if your explicit value is quality time with my kids, that's my top priority. Second priority is saving money, maybe. Let's say those are your top values. Then when your kid says, I want to sign up for soccer, it's pretty easy to say no. You don't feel guilty because your values were quality time and saving money. And that takes away from both. And then you don't feel guilty about that because you are actually making a decision that is aligned with your values. But like doing that in practice is very difficult. What have you seen when it comes to like letting go of guilt or setting values in a way that helps you? What it really helps you do is diminish guilt, but also diminish decision fatigue, right? Because if you have a clear
Right.
framework of values, some of those decisions that used to be hard actually become quite simple, right?
Yes. I will also say, I think something about the guilt conversation that is worth having is this: we live in a different time where there is much more pressure coming at us because of things like social media, right? And so we see what our friend from college is doing for their kid's birthday party. You have no idea what kind of birthday party that kid had. And so you didn't have to compare yourself to it. You didn't have to think about, was this birthday party the same as that birthday party? But
No one
now,
cares. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now you see what everyone's doing all the time. And not only that, you're being fed content constantly. Like, this is the birthday party I planned, and this is how I packed my son's backpack. And this is, you get all of this information coming at you. And you also have kind of comparison happening along with the decision fatigue. And so that guilt, oftentimes, when I talk to women, they'll say, like, logically, I know that this doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. And yet I still feel this guilt. I feel
Mm.
shame, or I feel as though I should do that for my kid. And historically, you might have received pressure from your mom or maybe a neighbor, but in reality, you didn't feel this like mounting pressure coming at you from all angles. And so I would say people who are not online in any way, like, probably feel a lot less guilt about these things because they're not getting fed so much. I think it also comes down to, again, where we place value, and not just with ourselves, but with our partners. Because, you brought up sports, for example. My family was a very big sports family. Like, that was actually very important to my parents for us to play a sport every single season. They thought it taught you a lot. It drove your work ethic. Like, they felt very passionately. Both my parents were athletes. Like, they felt very passionately about that. My husband didn't play that many sports growing up. It just wasn't something his family valued. And so when we had kids, we had to talk about, okay, well, do we value that? And at what point? And we limit how many activities they do per season, and because of things like cost and our time and logistics. But was it important for us to do it? We had to have that conversation, right? And so I think that's one of the hardest parts about this: is it's not just our personal values, it's our family values. And so we might have different values, and we have to come together and compromise or make decisions together about what those values look like, and then feel kind of steadfast in those and know that you've made a decision that you feel really good about, right? And so I think we're constantly doing that in parenthood: formula feeding, breastfeeding, this versus that, right? Like, it's this, from the second you become a parent, there will constantly be decision making you have to make based on your values and what you think is best for your family. And I think feeling really secure in those things with your partner is really, really helpful, and trying to tune out the rest of the noise, easier said than done. But I also do think disconnecting as much as possible from that kind of, like, the, what is it? Comparison is the thief of joy. Like, trying to compare what's going on in the world, even though that's really hard these days.
Yeah, definitely. One of the other things that was a big aha moment for me, which again is should be obvious, but it wasn't, when you talk about standards, right? And like how the way that you decide how something should be done, from how to throw, like, what does a birthday party look like? What meals are we cooking? What's a good after school activity? And what in a lot of my conversations with dads as part of Persist and interviewing what's working, I think my big aha moment was just how different the standards are. And very well intentioned, incredible dads were very honestly saying, hey, when I pick up the kids from school and we go to the park, we pick up McDonald's, we go to the park, we play, and I take them home, I hose them off barely, like, I'm great. All the feedback I'm getting is that I did an amazing job, from the people at the park to, my friends being like, "Oh, you had the kids by yourself? You took them to an activity, you fed them, you bathed them?" Like, and
Wow.
so there is a very real sense of pride, and there is a real feedback loop telling that particular person that that is a good standard,
Mhm.
versus a woman having that same experience is like, you were on your phone the whole time at the park. You weren't even paying attention to them. And then you did a drive-through, like you didn't even make them a meal, and then you didn't even give them a bath. Like you just rinsed that, like that. Maybe she's self-telling herself that, or maybe she's getting real signals, but either way, that exact same thing doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, isn't rewarded in the same way. And so even in cases with very well-meaning, you can see how there's already this big disconnect, because he's very much like, I'm doing a good job. Everyone's telling me how good it is. Right. And so, what have you seen in terms of how to help? We're not talking about anything other than just true well meaning partners that just navigate the world differently. Like, we just
Mhm.
do navigate the world differently. We're expected of different things when we parent. So what what was your aha moment? And then what have you seen that helps sort of close that gap?
Yeah. It's interesting because I do think it's about standards, but it's also about the expectations that are placed on us. And as mothers and women in particular, the standards for parenting are very, very high. Right? I always tell people, when my husband drops the girls off at school, if they're wearing a crazy outfit, people will be like, haha, dad dressed you today. And if I do that, they'd be like, what is she wearing? Like, why did mom let her come to school like that? Right? There's a very different expectation. And so, therefore, a lot of women I find get frustrated because their husbands will be like, let it go. Like, it doesn't matter. Who cares if her hair is a mess or if they had McDonald's today? And their partner's sitting there saying, well, I care because I'm the one receiving the feedback that is negative and you're receiving the positive feedback. And so it's not fair, right? It doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel aligned. The standards are different, right? And so it's even in the language we use, hands-on dad, active dad. Moms, you would never hear somebody call mom a hands-on mom. Every mom is a hands-on mom. It's like she's the default hands. Her hands are the ones that are on at all times. So it's that's the difference in expectation, that we even have that terminology to say hands-on dad, which insinuates that we should be thankful that he's even involved, right? And so the standards are already very different. And I think the hard thing for men, and I totally understand and empathize with this, which is that they're doing vastly more than their dads did. And then the world is telling them they're doing a great job. And then they come home and their partner's still unhappy. Like, I can never make her happy. I can never meet her expectations. And so I do think it's very important for couples to have intentional conversations about this, not just in passing, not when you're frustrated, but sitting down and saying, hey, this is the standard I'm held to. And this is what I expect of our family. Let's talk about what you expect and let's talk about why and how we come together on this. And it might look different, but I remember saying to my husband, we switch off mornings on weekends so we can just sleep in. And he would always on his morning try to make it this really fun morning, right? Like pancakes and all the things, right? And I would come downstairs to a kitchen that had pancake mess everywhere and kids who were like running around because the pancakes weren't done. And on my day, he would come downstairs, like the kitchen was clean, the kids had been fed like some protein and were ready for soccer or gymnastics. And I'm like, what I walk down to is very different than what you're walking down to. And it's not that you did anything like wrong, right? You got the kids up, you fed them breakfast, like you didn't do anything wrong. But you're the fun dad and I'm the mom who's coming in to like do all the things that like quote unquote are good for the kids, like give them the good meal and like keep them regulated and all the things. And I think that is the disconnect for a lot of couples. And so I think a lot of men don't understand the other side of it because they haven't been sitting there. They haven't been receiving that judgment or that negative feedback. Hearing their partner tell them out loud, this is exactly what happened, can be really, really helpful in a way that doesn't feel like blame. Like, it's your fault that I have all this pressure on me, right? Because it's not necessarily your partner's fault that you've been held to this really high standard, but talking about that, coming to an agreement about what your family standards are and why those are what they are. And so that way she can maybe come down a little bit and he can also come up to meet her. Because I think oftentimes we tell women, like, lower your standards, lower your standards, lower your standards, as opposed to men need to raise their standards, right? And meet her where she's at a little bit too.
Yeah, certainly in my own personal life, that it really was a bit of column A and column B. I got really sick with COVID and it kind of turned into long COVID and pneumonia and then RSV. It was both the worst thing and the best thing that happened to me because I quite literally couldn't do I couldn't uphold any standards. Like I could barely do the basics. And so, one, it forced a lot of things on my partner's plate that had never been on his plate before. And that as a fair partner, I never would have wanted to put that much on his plate. It wasn't particularly fair. But then also, even when I was doing stuff, like my standards just had to change based on like such
Yeah.
low energy. I only had a couple hours a day that I was going to be able to contribute. So I had to like be really thoughtful about my energy in a way that, like, as a track athlete in college, like I really did feel like my time and energy was somewhat expansive. Like I could always stay up an extra hour. I could always get it done. And I think having real constraints on that energy and having stuff shift to him, one, helped me realize, like, because then I was just so glad he picked up the ball and did the thing that I was like, that is actually a pretty reasonable standard, the way he did it. Like, our girls are really happy. They're thriving. We're laughing a lot. And like, their clothes have some stain. Like, do I really care? And then I have to be like, I don't care. He doesn't care. They don't care. So yeah, maybe I am going to be out in the world judged, but like I think coming to a set of things that again, I don't know. I would have loved to believe if I had used Persist, that I would have been able to let those things go through like a structured set of conversations. But oftentimes I've heard, and I'm curious what you've heard, is that sometimes it almost comes from a form of collapse or some form of burnout when like things just have to shift,
Mhm.
that's where transformation starts to happen.
Actually, I think what you said earlier is I think people get angry. They hit that point where they get angry, right? There's like this moment that happens, something happens, they're the point of collapse, whether it's physical burnout, emotional burnout, mental burnout, or actually, like for me, it was very similar to like Eve Rodsky's story from Bear Play. There was a day where every single thing was just like a representation of the imbalance in our house. That was my breaking point. I was so angry. And that was really the catalyst for change for our relationship because I don't think my husband realized how big it was, like how big it felt for me, all of this work. And I think, you mentioned like the standards part of it, which is I think part of it too, that can be missed in conversation is that I'll use laundry because we already talked about laundry, for example. A wife says, I always fold laundry this way. And the husband says, who cares? Like it can be folded however, like it's just laundry. Maybe she's been folding laundry for 3 years and she knows they have very limited cabinet space in their kid's closet. And she's figured out that if she folds it this way, she can actually fit it all in the drawer and the toddler can find their favorite t-shirt really easily and it saves her 10 minutes in the morning. Maybe that's what she's figured out. Having that conversation matters, right? It's not just that she likes to fold it this way for fun. She likes to fold it this way because over trial and error for the last 2 years, she figured out this is the best way to fit the kids' clothes in the drawer, for example, right? And I think those conversations, though, can be very hard to have when
Yes.
you reach that point of breakdown, when you reach that anger, right? Like there's too much going on. And so a tool like Persist or just any kind of tool in general like, and having intentional conversations before that point of breakdown or even after, but with a lot of intention can be really helpful because you can sit down and say, let's actually talk about this thing that we do, why I do it this way, why you like to do it that way, and come together on it. Because I think that's the missing piece, which is like, this is my standards, this is yours, and we don't agree. And it's like, well, okay, let's talk about why they exist to begin with. And then we can have a deeper conversation about how we go forward.
Well, I think you just brought up something really important, which is curiosity, right? And you also brought up something else, which is anger, resentment. And the anger resentment version is why would you do it that way?
Hmm.
Why did you think? What were you thinking? Right? Like there's and in many cases very fair anger and resentment because the skill gap or whatever it is that is like they something that in all fairness should be much more obvious and they don't get it. And so it like I want to very much validate all the feelings of anger and resentment. But if you can get to a place of curiosity and maybe it can't be in that moment because to your point, this
Usually
is
not.
the right moment for it. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's been one of the biggest game changers for our relationship. And it's one thing that's really woven into the app too is really one asking yourself why, trying to find your own why whenever possible. Why do I think this? Why do I believe this? Who does this belief serve? Why do I want to do it this way? Because it can even as like I get defensive when people ask me why I do something. And I get the most defensive when I don't actually know why. When I know why, I can normally sort of say it. And sometimes I'm exasperated because I'm like, obviously because of this. But I think when someone asks me why in a way that's probably subconscious, I haven't actually really thought about why I do it that way.
Mhm.
Right. And so, how do you get to a friendly curiosity where you're genuinely curious? Why do you think it should be done that way? And to your point, how do you have your partner say, hey, why do you fold it that way? And they're in a place of receptivity where when you say, oh, because then it can, and they're like, oh, brilliant. That
Yeah.
makes sense. It's not about my way's better than yours. It's just like, hey, give me context on why. I'll give you context on why. Do you have any tips in terms of how to either move from that point of frustration into curiosity or a healthier mindset? And then what's best way to kickstart one of these conversations?
Yeah. So one of the things I really like to do, and I say to everyone, is first and foremost, like as it pertains to domestic labor and the mental load, there's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot for one person. It's a lot for two people in a single family home that most people are kind of operating within these days. When one person is carrying a disproportionate amount of it, it's really hard to have these conversations, right? Because you're already burnt out and exhausted. So even coming to the table is difficult. But what I like to say to people is the mental load exists. That's a fact. All of this work exists, the domestic labor, it all exists, right? And so we can come to this conversation and say, I'm doing this, you're not doing enough, you don't meet my standards. We can do all of those things. And I understand the urge to do it, and I've done it myself. But the thing that's actually tends to be most productive is coming at it from the mindset of it is us against the problem. Okay. The problem we have right now is all of this work that has to be done. Like it is a problem. You're approaching it almost like you're at a company, right? Like this is the deadline we're meeting. This is the deliverables. This is what we have to do. So like, let's talk about how we're getting there. Come together and say, this is the problem. It's not me against you. It's us against this heavy, heavy weight of all this work that we have to do. I think first and foremost, that reframe can be really helpful for both people within the relationship. If you truly want to make it a change, if you truly want it to be productive, it tends to not be productive if we're just kind of going back and forth about who's doing what. Not that you're not going to talk about the work and like assign the work. It's more so just framing it as trying to figure out what's going to work best for your family. Then one thing I really actually encourage people to do at the beginning before you even start talking about all this stuff is actually going back to what you talked about, which is saying, what are our values? I like to say, like when my husband and I sat down, I asked him, I was like, well, what do you want to achieve? And he's like, I just want to have fun again. Like I feel like we don't have fun anymore because we're always talking about this or fighting about the dishwasher. Like we're not having fun. And I said to him, I was like, I need time. I don't have any time for myself, which you alluded to, the leisure gap, the fitness gap, all these things that women don't have time for themselves. I came to it, I was like, I don't have time for me. I don't have time for us. Like I don't have any energy to plan a date night. I have nothing left to give. I need more time back. And so as we approached the conversation, we had these two things like in our head. These are our goals. Like we want to have more time and more fun. How do we do that? And by sharing this work, we get it done faster. We don't spend as much time talking about this work. We don't spend as much energy on this work. We can then have more time to have more fun together, right? Like, I think approaching it that way is really helpful. So when you're sitting down to talk about the laundry, you're going in to talk about the laundry and you're thinking, how do we save time here? How do we save energy here? So that way we can have more fun in our lives. Some people just want more acknowledgement. Some people want their partner to do more. I do think framing the goal of like, what are we actually trying to achieve by doing this work together on the other side of it can be very, very helpful to go into it with the best intentions and that curiosity you talked about, which is like, I want to have fun with my wife. If my wife is burnt out and exhausted, then we're never going to be able to have fun together. So how do we bridge this gap? How do we change this? What do we need to do differently? And I think that is a part couples often miss. It's that part I think is actually pretty easy. It's harder to talk about standards and all of those things. The mental load is even harder, but getting on the same page about kind of the value and what you gain from doing it, that can be so helpful in reframing the conversation.
Totally. And one of the things, so we have CareQuest in the platform, and the CareQuest framework basically follows through a couple tiers. The very top tier is values, right? Everything around that sort of ladders down from what are those values. And the very next one is beliefs. And I think that was one, as I was going to build Persist, that became more and more apparent to me is sometimes much more the thing to solve than it is who's doing which task. It's just what are beliefs around how valuable this work is and how it should, how it should be done, who should be doing it. Those are beliefs, not that they do end up manifesting themselves into like actual chores that someone has to do. But one of the things that we've tried to build into the app, but that has been a big game changer for me too, is knowing how important beliefs are going into a conversation. So if I go into a conversation believing he won't be receptive, it won't get better, it won't make a difference, things will never change, which is a very like common way to feel. And again, it's not about saying you don't allowed to feel that way. So what I've had to really learn is like, maybe I can't go all the way to a belief that's like, my partner's amazing. I don't feel that right now, but what's a belief that I really can't, like a stable one of, my partner loves our children and wants our household to be filled with love, right? I believe that my partner also wants a productive conversation and a harmonious house. So how can I find some beliefs that make me enter that conversation in a way where I can be successful, where they can be successful too? Because it is incredibly hard to I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation in which somebody is expecting you to fail and almost leading you in a way that it's hard to do anything other than start a fight or fail. What have you seen around like this sort of mindset or examining limiting beliefs that you've seen really help families?
Yeah, it can be hard. I think one thing we don't often talk about is, and I get why it's hard to have this conversation, which is that you brought up kind of, I'm expecting them to fail. And they always promise they're going to do better, and then they do for a little while and then they stop. Right. And so there's this already built in belief system about our partner and what they can and cannot do. And rightfully so, right? You get to this point where you're like, okay, I've tried, I've done all the things. But I think what often we miss is we don't actually talk about why do they fail? I think some people believe like the big quote of like if he wanted to, he would. I don't think it's as simple as that, right? I don't. I really don't. And I think so often we ignore the fact we've talked about societal conditioning and expectations and the way that like some of the work that I do as a mother, I've been doing since I was a kid, right? Like I was the eldest daughter. I've been doing some of this my entire life and my partner wasn't. And so I can't expect him to learn all of these things and catch up to me in a month, a week, 2 weeks. Like it's going to take time. And not only is it going to take time, we're all coming from a different place of ability too. There's things that I'm not strongest at where he's better suited for it and vice versa. An example of this would be our big fight, the divorce thing that went viral online was said I woke up and he had promised to empty the dishwasher and because I needed the kids' water bottles and to take out the trash. And like neither of those things had been done. And my husband is notoriously a person who has a very difficult time waking up for his alarm. He does have to go to work very early. So, like, I feel for him. But, like, he learned, he's like, if I'm going to meet this expectation of like what I've agreed to do, so that way Paige's morning goes smoothly with the 4 kids by herself, because that's also objectively hard. I can't do it in the morning. Because every time I say I'm going to do it in the morning, I don't do it because I'm running late for work and it falls to the bottom of my list and then it falls to the top of Paige's list, right? Like it always just, it's not working. And so now my husband still has those accountabilities. He just does them at night. Every night before bed, he empties the dishwasher. He fills all the kids' water bottles up. He sets himself up to like make sure he feeds the dog in the morning, like has the bowls ready, whatever makes his morning easier. He's still committing to the exact same things. He's doing them differently than he was before. And every time he did it that way before he failed, quote unquote, failed. And I was frustrated and angry. And I'm like, he just doesn't care. And he was like, it's not that I don't care. It's not working with my morning, right? It's not working with how my mornings operate. And so we had to have a conversation about, okay, well, how do we make it work? How do we do it differently? How do we set it up so you don't fail and that you do it in a way that is successful for you and for me, right? And sometimes that means he and I switch tasks. Sometimes that means he does his task different. Sometimes I do mine different. And I think it's also having the ability to like do that work, which takes time and effort and it's exhausting to have to analyze when you empty the dishwasher. It sounds silly, but it does actually matter doing that kind of work with your partner and being able to say, like, it's not inevitable that he's going to always forget to do this and make me do it in the morning. That's not inevitable. Let's talk about how we do it differently. And now we've been doing this, for 2 years in our house. Like he empties it at night. Water bottles are always on the counter in the morning. Like everything is good. But we hadn't figured that out until we sat down to say, like, why do you never do this? And I got an opportunity to say, when you don't do this, this is what it does to my morning. In a way that I wasn't just yelling at him about it and getting mad, but I was able to say, like, when you don't do that, this is what my morning looks like because you failed to do the thing you said you would do. And we got to have that conversation and ultimately change the way we did things. And that goes back to that belief system you were talking about, which is like, if you believe that they genuinely want the house to operate well, they want you to be happy, and they actually care about the impact it has on you, then it's worth having that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for whatever reason, when you were talking about this, it triggered a really important memory for me of another sort of aha I had when I was home on mat leave for my second baby, right? You are very aware, like I was staying at home. So I would know what time she was eating, how much she was sleeping, if she had been gassy or if she hadn't taken as good of naps, or there's a lot of data I'm getting all day around what her day looked like, such that when Will would come home at night and she'd be fussy, I could be like, oh, she's hungry or she's more tired because right. I'd have a bunch of information that made me better at something, right? Because I had spent all day learning not only learning the cues, but also just knowing the information that like
Totally.
she was sleeping or she was running a little bit of a fever. And that helped me seem magic, right? Like I was better in the evenings. And then, but I wasn't consciously aware of this, right? And then when I went back to work full time and I came back and, she's fussy and Will's like, what's wrong with her? And I had a total meltdown because I was like, I don't know. And it was in that moment, I was like, oh, why don't I know? Oh, because I didn't spend any time with her today. You have as much detail as I have right now about why she might be fussy. And that wasn't his fault either, right? Because like, he had been up to that point able to ask me, and I had been up to that point able to have some sense. And, in that particular case, we put our heads together and said, okay, what information do we need from the baby, the nanny, whoever's watching her, so that we feel comfortable? And because I'd always felt like I don't want to micromanage nannies. I don't need to know every time she poops. I don't, but I realized that I kind of do, at least when she's really tiny, because those things tell me about,
Yeah.
when the baby gets handed off to me. So, anyways, it was sort of like a real life moment of realizing, just how much invisible things might be making it easier for me to do something and harder for them to do it. And then trying to think really consciously about, okay, how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah. And I think this goes back to way back because I had almost the exact same situation as you when it was around like feeding schedules. My husband one time was like, when does she eat now? And I said, oh, like, how do you not know her bottle schedule? Like, it's been this way for a month. And he's like, well, you're home with her all day because I worked from home. And I'm like, but the nanny's doing it. And I was like, the nanny's not telling me when to feed her. I'm telling the nanny what, like, I'm like, and I'm like Googling this and talking to the doctor. But he didn't see any of that work. Right. And this often happens especially in heterosexual relationships, especially in a system where there's no paternity leave and women are taking that mat leave, which is that, you mentioned it at the beginning that some of this, our moms didn't talk about it. It was meant to be invisible. It was meant to look seamless and easy and all these things. And we do that too. I've done that too, where it's like, yeah, I went to the pediatrician and I talked about this thing. I wouldn't report back to my husband. I would just like be the keeper of the information. And at one point he would ask me questions and I'd be like, oh yeah, whatever. And he's like, no, like like I would like to know what the doctor said. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, like, yeah, that's valid. Like you should know that even if you weren't there. And I think that goes back to the idea of like, this isn't your fault. It's not his fault. Like some of this is systemic in the way that we operate, especially in those early days of parenthood, where it's like, I took these things on. I am the keeper of this information because I'm the one physically here. And the reason I'm the one physically here is because of the systems at play. It's not because my partner doesn't want to be here, but it has created this dynamic that is very hard to undo. And so I think it's worth also addressing that too when we have these conversations, which is like, why do I know? Yeah, when she eats. Why do I know that the doctor said to cut the grapes? Right? Because I was there. And it's not his fault he wasn't there. And so I think it's having a little bit of space for the nuance there and being able to also look outside of ourselves at those systemic barriers and say, this is part of it, right? The fact that I'm the one physically here for whatever reason is part of how this mental load dynamic and domestic labor dynamic comes to be.
Yeah. I think that's so important. This was great. I think that those were my last formal questions. Is there any tip or trick or any specific message you want to leave the Persist users or our followers with? Any big takeaway? No pressure.
No, I mean, the big one I always say when people ask me that question is that it's not your fault. Like, this is not an issue that, which we've already talked about. I am always like, this is not like your fault if you ended up here. Cause I feel like everybody feels like
It
they did
is.
something wrong. And so that's my big one. I think we've covered most of it. I think you hit the point I say all the time. I think men get a bad rap in this conversation, and that I actually genuinely believe that a lot of men want to be really great partners and want to be really great parents and are ill equipped and undereducated on what it looks like to do this work. And some of that's systemic, some of that's societal conditioning, some of that's lack of information, right? Some of it is lack of engagement, right? But I do think if your partner is willing and wants to do this work, then it's very possible to change these dynamics. I do not think it is an inevitable foregone conclusion that moms are going to do all this work, that women are going to do all this work. I don't think that is true. I think men are highly capable of showing up in this way. And if we put in that time and effort, it is so much better on the other side. So I do like to leave people with that, which is like, you might have a year of hard work, maybe more, but on the other side of that, you gain so much. You really do. And it's worth the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, personally, completely. I'm so grateful that we went on this journey too,
Same.
because we've not figured it all out. I haven't met one of those couples, but we've made some really, really
I don't
solid.
know that anyone has figured it all out. There's too much, and like, especially if you're parents, it's like, it's just always changing. Like, it's like always figuring out something new to manage and to navigate. I don't think we'll ever figure it out, but you get closer to it. You gain the skill set, right? I think that's something too to say, like, when you start this work, you get the skill set to deal with what comes in the future, right? Your kids are going to start playing sports and you're going to have to navigate a sport calendar and dinners that you can make at 9 p.m. at night. And you're going to be equipped to have those conversations because you've been doing this work for a really long time with your partner. And so it won't feel, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to figure it out, but you're going to have the skill set to navigate that with your partner, which you might not have had if you hadn't done the work together.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Paige. This was awesome.